GoForThe2.com in with the Week 5 predictions. Week number 4 did not disappoint. We saw great games from start to finish. Saw Florida State hand Clemson, only their third home loss since 2015. Amazing outcome in terms of the momentum change late in the fourth quarter. Clemson potentially going up 14. Florida State sends a safety blitz. They get the sack, scoop and score. Really changes the momentum. Tied at 24. Clemson comes right back. They're driving down the field, and Dabo opts to try a field goal with a kicker that did not attempt a field goal attempt all season long. They brought him back from Wall Street, potentially trying to get a job because of all the kicking issues. And credit Mike Norvell, credit Jordan Travis and Keon Coleman for the touchdown pass early in the overtime. They get the victory 31-24, and potentially the dynasty is done in Clemson for Dabo Swinney and the crew. We saw, obviously, Oregon dominate Colorado all on the ground. This game was won in terms of the interior. They got pressure on Shedeur Sanders, pounded the rock for over 5 yards per carry, and Dan Lanning had a dominant defensive game plan to sustain and really just neutralize the Colorado offense. An amazing effort by the Ducks at home. We also saw Penn State dominate Iowa. We saw Alabama dominate Ole Miss, hand the Ole Miss Rebels only the 8th loss in regards to the series. Again, if you want all the top 25 analysis, all the breakdowns, tune into Carver and Lisi every Monday through Friday, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern on Sirius Channel 159. And then Saturday mornings, College Football Today, 9 a.m. to noon Eastern. We get you prepped and ready for kickoff. SportsGrid.com for the video side, or Sirius Channel 159, Sirius XM Channel 159, 9 a.m. to noon Eastern. Best bets, prop bets, under the radar games, you name it. We have it on College Football Today. It's going to be more of a rapid fire video. You can always tweet me at GoForThe2, the number 2. Let's jump right into it. Big battle taking place in terms of Miss State and Alabama. Alabama's owned this series. They've won 15 straight against the Bulldogs. Picked up this victory last year in Tuscaloosa, 30-6. They've won the last 4 in the series by an average margin of victory of 34 points per game. We saw Jalen Milroe and that offense step up. Milroe completes 17-21, 221, 1 tutty, and 1 interception in terms of that ball game. Defense steps up, makes Jackson Dart and that offense completely one-dimensional. They trailed 7-6 at half. Halftime adjustments, and they win 24-10. Now, Alabama goes on the road to face a Miss State team that's reeling. They've lost back-to-back games to LSU and last week to South Carolina. Miss State was in striking distance. They were down by 3 for much of the game. They get a terrible Will Rogers fumble deep inside their territory. South Carolina goes up 10 with about 7 minutes left. Miss State drives. They're catching 6.5. And with just about 2.5 minutes left, Zach Arnett opts on a 4th down to kick the field goal to cut the deficit to 7. They lost that ball game by 7. They were catching 6.5 in that ball game. But a couple of things. We know about the weakness right now of Alabama. From a defensive perspective, it's still the secondary. They're giving up 227 passing yards per game. They give up over 300 to Quinn Ewers. They give up, last week, 245 to Jackson Dart. Even though they contained that Ole Miss offense, Jackson Dart was able to move the football through the air. Offensive line for Alabama, still playing bad. They've allowed 16 total sacks on the year through 4 games. That's 4 per game. And you look at Miss State right now. They have transformed their offense in 1 week. Entering that ball game last week against South Carolina, they were more run heavy, averaging 170 rushing yards per game, only throwing it for 165 yards through the air. What happens on the road against Spencer Rattler? Will Rogers breaks out for 487 yards. Why is that important? Well, the game is in Starkville. They're coming off back-to-back losses. It's under the lights. It's a primetime SEC game. They're going to be getting up for Alabama, and if Will Rogers plays the way he did last week, he could potentially put up some points on Alabama's secondary. That's the matchup to keep an eye out on. I think Alabama definitely wins. However, I think Miss State is within the 15.5-point number Saturday night in Starkville. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game, Milroe can eat, but I also think Will Rogers could potentially put up 400 yards as well and score and keep it within the 15.5-point number. Also think this is a must-win or a must-good showing for Zach Arnett. Hasn't shown the ability to this point to make second-half adjustments, but did break out the offense last week. This is a bounce-back spot for the Bulldogs. Big battle taking place in terms of LSU and Ole Miss. LSU has won 6 of the last 7 in terms of the series. They won this ball game last year in Baton Rouge, 45-20. They abused Jackson Dart in that offense. More importantly, Arkansas pushed LSU to the limit last week. LSU was laying 18 points at home. It was a rivalry game. Every time LSU got to a 7-8 point lead in the second half, KJ Jefferson and that offense responded. They pushed them to the limit. LSU did get the 34-31 victory over a gutty Arkansas team. They go on the road to face Ole Miss. Why do I like LSU here? It's Jaden Daniels going up against Jackson Dart. Jaden Daniels throws for 321 yards. They come right out of the gate in terms of second half adjustments last week. They score on their first 4 possessions. Almost every possession was 75 plus. Malik Neighbors with a big performance. Mason, the tight end, with a huge performance. Jaden Daniels with 4 touchdowns and 1 interception. But it's the third down offensive consistency why I favor LSU here. They're converting 58% of their third down opportunities. They're throwing for 323 through the air, rushing for $193. You saw Gibbs get going. You saw Josh Williams get going. That travels well, in my opinion, on the road in Oxford. Ole Miss struggled last week in terms of third down offense, converted 3 of 14 against Alabama, only rushed for 56 yards on the ground. Jackson Dart was contained. Quinshawn Junkins was contained, and I think that's where you favor the LSU defense. Not only that, but they were able to contain KJ Jefferson for the most part last week. Even though it was a close game, I think they can contain Jackson Dart in this matchup, lay in a low number, 2.5. I do feel that LSU is the more complete side. They win it by double digits in the Grove Saturday night, a 6 p.m. start. Another big battle in terms of the SEC is Georgia and Auburn, SEC's oldest rivalry. We saw Georgia win 49-21. They did not cover the 40.5-point number against UAB. We saw the rushing attack again for Georgia get going. Why is that important? Well, Georgia hasn't rushed for 200 yards all season long, and we talk about the difference in terms of Georgia this year potentially from last year. Every time, and you can go back to 2016, every time Georgia runs the football and rushes for over 200, they're undefeated. Last year they were 8-0 every time they pounded the rock for over 200. Since 2016 against FCS and FBS opponents, 45-0 every time they rush for over 200. With just FBS opponents, they are 41-0 since 2016. But in back-to-back games, 189 against South Carolina, 190 last week. I think that travels well against an Auburn defense that gave up 209 yards on the ground to Texas A&M. When you look at the series perspective, Georgia has won 6 straight in the series, the last 3 by an average margin of victory of 25.6 points per game. Got this victory last year, 42-10. You look at the flip side for Auburn, completely one-dimensional. They're only averaging not even 180 passing yards per game. Last week, they only threw for basically 56 yards through the air, completely one-dimensional. They can't run the football consistently anymore. And more importantly, 3 of 14 again, or 4 of 15, on third down conversions. When you look at the flip side for Georgia, they're holding opposing offenses to 83 rushing yards per game. They're only allowing 193 passing yards to opposing quarterbacks. They did allow 250 to Spencer Rattler, 250 to Jacob Zeno, but Peyton Thorne and Robbie Ashford are completely one-dimensional, inconsistent. Offensive line broke down last week as well in terms of critical third downs, and Georgia's third down defense still holding opposing offenses to 28% of their third down opportunities. To me, that's the difference, laying a 14.5-point number. I think Georgia goes on the road. It's a rivalry game. I think they win this ball game anywhere from 21 to 24 points against the Tigers. Think the rushing attack takes over. Carson Beck, in my opinion, doesn't have to do much. It's the defense and the running game that'll get it done against the Tigers. Big battle taking place between South Carolina and Tennessee. Tennessee gets a dominating home win over UTSA without Frank Harris. They pound the rock for over 300 yards. They now face off against South Carolina that did get the win last week against Miss State, 37-30. This was the game last year. South Carolina and Spencer Rattler broke out, 63-38 over the Tennessee Volunteers, knocked them out of contention for potentially a college football playoff. But we talk about how the difference is in terms of Tennessee. More run heavy, not running enough tempo with Joe Milton. Joe Milton's only thrown for 925 yards, 8 touchdowns, 1 interception, but it's not as explosive as an offense. They're not converting as well as they were in years past, especially last year for much of the year before the South Carolina game. Tennessee was right in the area of about 51% third down conversions, still 11% less than where they were last year. Not only that, but they're facing a hot quarterback in Spencer Rattler. Spencer Rattler, 8 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He completed 18 of 20 passes last week against Miss State, 288 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. He's battle-tested. He went into Athens, almost knocked off the Georgia Bulldogs with a great performance, especially in the first half. Tennessee, I don't think they're as dominant as everybody thinks, at least at the start of the year at home. I know they're a much better home team than they are on the road, but again, this secondary I think could be exposed. You look at who Tennessee has faced from an offensive perspective: UTSA without Frank Harris, Virginia, and Florida with Graham Mertz. And it wasn't even Graham Mertz that potentially took over. It was Etienne in the rushing attack. This is one of the most explosive passing offenses in terms of the SEC East right now, led by a veteran wide receiver core, led by Spencer Rattler. I think they're live plus the 12.5 Saturday night against the Volunteers. Tennessee might win, but give me South Carolina plus the points in that ballgame. Big Ten battle. We got Michigan on the road against Nebraska. Michigan does dominate Rutgers 31-7. They get the win, but no cover against the Scarlet Knights. It's an offense right now converting 55% of their third down opportunities, only pounding the rock for 165 yards on the ground, but this team is getting it done defensively, only giving up 80 rushing yards per game, haven't allowed a team to rush for over 103 yards on the ground, and they're going to potentially get a test from a very run-heavy offense led by Matt Rule and, more importantly, his running back, Anthony Grant. This is an offense right now in Nebraska that got right. They rushed well over 200 yards against Louisiana Tech, actually pounded the rock, I believe, for 300. They're averaging 234 rushing yards on the ground, throwing it for right in the area of about 130 passing yards per game. But you look at Heinrich Harburg, the quarterback that took over for Jeff Sims, 51% completion percentage, over 580 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. He's playing clean with the football. And this is a game that potentially Nebraska could show well. It's a number 2 team in the country. Michigan, they're playing lights out. They're winning but not covering. Nebraska playing with house money. Biggest game potentially since Colorado. Last time Michigan went in there, they won 32-29. I think Michigan wins, but I do feel Nebraska's live under the lights in Lincoln. Give me the 18 points with the Cornhuskers. Iowa, Miss State, last time these teams played was 2020. Iowa gets completely shut down by Penn State. Unbelievable. 56 passing yards in that ball game. They allowed Nick Singleton, Katron Allen to break out. Drew Aller as well, dominating 31-0 performance. They come back home. All the pressure on Kirk Ferentz and Brian Ferentz to break out the offense, but I don't know if they can do it. I think this offense is completely one-dimensional. They were only averaging 150 yards prior to the performance in Happy Valley, and they're facing a pretty good defense in Michigan State. I know Michigan State lost 2 games back-to-back to Maryland, 31-9. They got blown out by Washington, but this is still a defense that's very good in terms of third down defense, holding opposing offenses to only 28% of their third down opportunities. They play well against a run in terms of 3.8 yards per rush allowed. And let's be honest, Cade McNamara in Iowa is not Michael Penix or even Maryland and Talia in terms of the quarterback perspective. Iowa laying 11.5, 12 to Michigan State. I'll take Sparty plus the points with this ball game. Even think they potentially have a better quarterback, whether it be Noah Kim or Hauser, the backup. I think they have the better quarterback advantage over Cade McNamara. I think Michigan State can be live well within this number Saturday night in terms of Iowa City. Last game, I'm stepping in front of Michael Penix and Washington. They're playing lights out. They're covering numbers. They're putting up well over 400 passing yards per game. Dominated Cal as a 20.5-point home favorite. They go on the road. They're laying 18 to Arizona. Arizona right now, from a defensive perspective, holding opposing offenses to 95 rushing yards per game, 195 passing yards allowed. I understand it's Penix, potentially one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football, but DeLore and that offense can move it as well. They're averaging 274 passing yards through the air, 164 on the ground, and I think that's where Arizona potentially can exploit the Washington defense. On the ground, sustain drives, take it into the fourth quarter. Washington wins, but I'm taking the Wildcats in Tucson plus the 18 points. Here's the breakdown and all the picks for Saturday. Miss State plus the 15.5. We have LSU minus the 2.5 against Auburn. We have Georgia laying the 14.5 against, Ole Miss. LSU laying the 2.5 against Ole Miss. Georgia laying the 14.5 against Auburn. We have South Carolina plus the 12 against Tennessee. Nebraska plus the 18 against Michigan. Michigan State plus the 12 or in the area of 12 against Iowa. And Arizona plus the 18 over Washington. I'll rapid fire it again just so you know. Miss State plus the points. LSU minus the 2.5. We have Georgia minus the 14.5. South Carolina plus the points against Tennessee. Nebraska plus the points against Michigan. We have Michigan State plus the points against Iowa and, Arizona plus the points against Washington. It's a late night. It's Monday. We're working around the clock. Have a great week, everyone. You could tweet me at Go for the Two and see me on Saturday. Talk to you then.